It's a distinct pleasure to have this panel here today. I know that many of us grew up with this movie. I guess those of us who are over the hill like myself did. I don't know. Maybe a lot of you, I guess, these days didn't. But it was a key movie of the generation, especially for those of us who later got into computers. So it's a distinct pleasure to have both this panel and this showing. And without further ado, all of you, I assume, maybe not all of you, hopefully all of you know Craig Silverstein, our #1 Google employee. He never got the spinny hat. Actually, he didn't even get a paycheck for like a long, long time either of us. It wasn't until we hired somebody who did HR that we could get paychecks. But he's #1 not just in terms of time, but in terms of our #1 culture czar, #1 talent. He also scored a perfect 1600 on the SAT. Well, this was back when the SAT was hard. No, in later years they adjusted it. It was actually, there were many more 1600s after a certain year. Now, in retrospect, having learned he's a fan of this movie, I don't know, maybe he just got into the ETS computers. So I don't know if that result is entirely earned, but we'll have to find out. In any case, on that note, Craig's going to host this panel and introduce our distinguished panel members. So welcome.
Thanks, Sergey. I just want to start by saying that I had nothing to do with organizing this. So I appreciate everyone who's thanked me for coming up with the idea and putting it on. But actually, the idea wasn't mine. I think it was Mr. Parks came up with the idea, and then the planning happened as if by magic. I think Ann Hyatt was the one who was responsible. Ann, are you around? Ann was the one who was responsible for making this all happen. As far as I can tell, my major qualification for moderating this panel is not only did I see the movie, but I also read the novelization of WarGames.
Oh my God! By David Bischoff,
which makes me uniquely qualified, perhaps, for this panel. Luckily, the panelists with me are much better qualified than I am, and so we should have a good discussion. Walter Parks. He is a motion picture producer. He's a writer, a former studio head. I'm not any of those things. For the last 14 years, he's been associated with DreamWorks, where he ran from its inception in 1994 until 2005. He won the he was nominated for the Academy Award 3 times as a producer and a screenwriter. He's done movies like The Kite Runner, Sweeney Todd, which won the Golden Globe. It was a good movie. Other films produced or executive produced by Mr. Parks include Men in Black and The Other Men in Black, Gladiator, Minority Report, Catch Me If You Can, The Ring, The Terminal, Lemony Snicket, the first one, I guess, Road to Perdition, AI, Deep Impact, Twister, The Legend of Zorro, and Amistad. Not only that, he is a member of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, and the Writers Guild of America, and the Global Business Network. He's also the president of Yale University Council, which advises the president of Yale about academic things. So welcome. Lawrence Lasker is a screenwriter and producer who entered film with as the writer of WarGames. So this is a nostalgic movie, I guess, for that reason. He's the son of actress Jane Greer and producer Edward Lasker. Lasker and Walter Parks were nominated for an Academy Award in Screenwriting in 1983 for WarGames. He and Parks were later also nominated for Best Picture of the Year in 1990 for Awakenings, but we won't be talking about that one. So welcome. Yeah. We'll get to that, I think. Peter Schwartz, co-founder and chairman of Global Business Network, which is a partner of the Monitor Group, and it's a company based in San Francisco that works to help companies, governments, and nonprofits think strategically about the future to make better decisions today. Peter's written many books on a wide variety of future-oriented topics. His most famous book, does anyone know? The Art of the Long View from 1991, which is considered by many to be the seminal publication on scenario planning, and it's used as a textbook by many business schools. He also co-wrote The Long Boom in 1999, which is a look at the future characterized by global openness, prosperity, and discovery. He consulted on several movies, and one of them was Minority Report, and another one was Deep Impact. Another one was Sneakers, which is a movie that I guess all three of you have been involved in. And another one, which we have a sign for as well. And another one was WarGames, which is why he's here today. So welcome. So that's all of us. I will start directly with questions. The questions from the audience, I don't think we have any of them listed. I can see them here. I have to say the questions, I feel like some of them were not entirely original. Here is the top voted question that we got. We'll see if I can do it right. How about a nice game of chess? Did anyone bring a chessboard? So I guess the answer to that question is no. So we'll do... let me talk a little bit about the movie, actually. WarGames, 1983. It's a suspense film. It was written by Lawrence Lasker, Walter F. Parks, directed by John Badham. It starred Matthew Broderick in his second film role. Does anyone know what his first film role was?
X? No, that was later.
Project X? No, it wasn't that.
That was also their movie.
That was also their movie, but later. It was a movie that no one's heard of, I guess, which is why WarGames was his first, the picture that catapulted him into fame. It was also Ali Sheedy's first movie, I believe. She went on to star in many more. It also starred Dabney Coleman, John Wood, Barry Corbin. It did quite well at the box office. It cost $12 million, which today would pay for catering, but then paid for a full movie. And it grossed over $74 million, which today would pay for a full movie, but then was a healthy profit. And it played for 5 months, which is, I guess, another sign that it was made a long time ago when they showed movies for a long time in the theaters. The NORAD set, part of the movie, cost $1 million alone. It was the most expensive movie set up until that time. So when you're watching the movie, pay special attention to it, because a lot of love and care went into it. But the most interesting part, I think, wasn't really the fancy sets or all that. It was kind of the way that it introduced technology and the internet, I think, in particular, to the world. I had a computer in '83. I think a lot of people did, but I definitely didn't have a modem. I didn't know about this world of things you could dial into and kind of the interconnected, I guess it was the internet at that time, the ARPANET mostly, the military stuff. You know, what inspired you to write a movie about this? What kinds of things were you thinking about?
The original idea was I was inspired by a film about Stephen Hawking. And it struck me that he might discover the unified field theory and not be able to explain it to anyone because he would be paralyzed. And so he needed a successor, and I was thinking, well, who would that be? Like a kid who could sort of understand him, and a kid who's a juvenile delinquent whose problem is that he's too smart, and nobody knows that. And that's when Walter and I started talking about getting these two characters together, a juvenile delinquent kid who gets in trouble somehow and is brought into the world of geniuses and science. And this was 1979. I don't think either one of us knew that computers could hook up over the phones. That was a revelation. But so we decided, instead of writing a movie that's based on what we can imagine and other movies and books, we wanted to actually do research into the real world and see what was going on and how these two characters could find each other. And
well, I was just going to say, what's interesting, Larry's right, is it's remembered for its tech content, and maybe it's the most important part of it, but it taught me a lesson early on that I've forgotten over and over again, which are stories start with characters. It actually really did begin as a story that had nothing necessarily to do with technology, or at least we didn't know what technology we would explore. It was strictly a story of this journey of a kid from an environment that couldn't understand him to find a father figure. And it's just extraordinary. If you have something like that, a basic human story at the bottom of it, how much easier it is to create the superstructure which the film is. I mean, we've had other experiences, both together and separately, where you're approaching the technology as an end in itself, and it becomes a very difficult and at times self-defeating process.
Yeah.
So I think the movie works primarily because it started from a character point of view. And then Larry was a journalist and I did some documentary filmmaking. We both had a penchant toward research, which is how we...
Yeah, let's find the real story instead of trying to make it up, because it's usually much more interesting than what you can imagine.
Which is what brought us to Mr. Schwartz.
Yeah, I remember I called the Stanford Research Institute and I talked to the public information officer, and I told him basically, we want to come up there, we want to just find, what's going on in the world, and it's about a kid and a dying scientist, and that's about all I told him. And he said, are you coming up next week? I said, yeah. He says, all right, well, I'll have some meetings set up for you. And we showed up, and he sent us first to some people, and they told us why we had come, and they told us what questions to ask them. It was so easy, our work was done for us. And then they would send us on, okay, now you have to go speak to these people. And on the second day, it led to Peter Schwartz and your futurist group. And you were the one who said, take a look at video games, yeah? Yeah, video games? We go, oh yeah, Atari. He goes, yeah. And look at what the military is doing, how they're piggybacking onto video games for wargaming and for training. I think maybe that's where your two characters can hook up.
And for me, I was at Stanford Research Institute in the 1970s, but hanging around the whole computer culture that was just beginning to emerge, and it was literally a culture, and that's what really set, I think, the character in the story aside. But it was also what was going on then. There's enough people in the room who are old enough to remember what that emerging culture was like in the 70s of Xerox PARC and Stanford, the Stanford Music Group, the AI group at SRI, the Human Augmentation Lab. And there were maybe 100, 200 people in the Palo Alto, Menlo Park, Mountain View area who hung out at places like the People's Computer Company and a few other places where you could buy computer parts and assemble stuff. You couldn't buy a PC. There wasn't anything like that around. If you wanted a computer, you built it. And that's what I did, and a whole bunch of friends did. And what we were doing with it, we were on the ARPANET. My first experience of working remotely was using the ARPANET writing scenarios for the governor of Washington in 1973. When we were still called the ARPANET, and I had a TI Silent 700 terminal about this big, portable terminal that I carried home with a little acoustic coupler in it and a little thermal, you remember a thermal printer coming up the back. And well, that's what we did. And so when Walter and Larry came, and I said, there's this whole culture out there of these kids who are inventing a new world and are creating new capabilities, and the thing that binds them all together are games. That is what we play online. We were playing things like Star Trader, Space War. My colleague Stuart Brand wrote about something called Space War and how that bound all the computer kids together. So there was this culture, and that was really, I think, part of what was captured best in WarGames.
So that's interesting. So you're saying that you came and you didn't really know what technology would be important. You came, you talked to some people, you got this idea about video games, I guess, networked computers and so forth. And you're like, okay, that sounds great, we'll go with that. So how did that play out as you were writing the movie and then directing it and so forth? Did you depend a lot on consultants to figure out what to do, or did you kind of make stuff up?
Well, we found some hackers to sort of help guide us through that world. And, we had some great consultants, Willis Ware at the RAND Corporation. And he's a wonderful guy because a lot of people, you find these technical experts, and they spend all their time telling you why you can't do something. And Willis Ware, who had worked with John von Neumann at Princeton on the ENIAC, and had actually worked on designing the NORAD computer system. So he knew what the real thing was. And he would say, well, what do you need? What do you need to make it work? And we'd tell him what we need in the story. And then he would say, okay, there's an open line in Sunnyvale. They say that it's hardwired and it's dedicated. It never is. Someone always has to get in from home. There'll be an open line. That'll work, And then hackers would, I remember calling up and saying, well, how would you find a computer, let's say he's looking for a video game company in the whole Sunnyvale region. He said, well, he can program his computer to dial every single number and note when he finds a modem tone.
That's called war dialing.
Which is now called war dialing,
right.
Yeah.
After WarGames. It did not exist before this movie, did it?
No.
No. Well, almost none of this existed. I mean, in fact, I mean, it's important to recognize that nothing you saw on screen had been seen on screen before. None of the technology, none of the idea of a dial-up access, the idea of a kid with a computer, the idea of games, none of that had ever been seen on screen before.
Yeah, Larry makes a good point, which is connected to the first thing I was saying. Because we basically had a character idea, all of our research was always done in a context. It was a context of where we thought we wanted the story to go. So as opposed to saying, how does it work? It would tend to be, as he says, well, how would these two characters connect? How would someone connect to from outside into a computer system? And it's extraordinary the extent to which those creative minds could connect to the process that we were trying to accomplish.
Right. Well, you go through a lot of consultants until you find someone who can be really helpful. They boil down, years of experience, tell them what you need, and they come up with the thing you need.
Having said that, the process, it was about 3 months of pure research, I remember, and a good 9 months of writing the script itself. And there were many wrong turns. We had a whole draft that was based on breaking into a space-based laser defense system, before we realized, A, they didn't exist yet, and it wasn't really, didn't have the kind of cultural, reference that what we had.
You left that for real genius to do.
And I guess the other key consultant would be Duncan Wilmore, Colonel Duncan Wilmore, whose job was the Hollywood office of the Air Force. And I remember we went to see him in the Federal Building in L.A., and he's his feet up on the desk, and he's reading Variety, and he's in this full colonel's outfit. And his job is a liaison. And but the story was that there was no tours of NORAD, and we really wanted to see Cheyenne Mountain. So I just kept bugging him, and finally, he's just sick of my calls, and he goes, look, we have a VIP tour going out next week. I suppose I could piggyback you guys onto that. And I go, sure, that'll work, So we flew to NORAD on the C-130 transport, and we saw Cheyenne Mountain, the Crystal Palace, which was really disappointing. It's just a kind of a dark little room, not very sexy. And but the buildings are on these big springs, and that was impressive. And the door we'll see in the movie, the door slamming shut was amazing. And that evening they had a sort of a dog and pony show at a restaurant, not a restaurant, but a banquet hall. And General Hardinger was up on stage, and afterward we're going back to the bus to take the VIP tour back to our hotel, and Hardinger comes up and sort of grabs us by the neck and says, I understand you boys are writing a movie about me. And we said, well, yes, we are. He said, well, come on, let's go have a drink and talk about it. And then Walter goes, well, we have to get, in the bus to go back to the hotel. And he goes, God damn it, I have 50,000 men in my command. I think I can get you back to the hotel. And I'm not allowed to drink off base, so come on. So we talked about it, and he loved, the idea we were pushing, which was keep human beings in the loop. And he goes, God damn it, the DOD's coming down every day trying to get us to get humans out of the loop. And he says, I sleep well at night knowing I'm in charge.
Well,
and drinking.
The interesting story about Crystal Palace in the movie is that, of course, if you go there today, it looks like the movie. Because what actually happened, I do a lot of consulting with the military and those sorts of folks, and about 3 or 4 years ago, I actually went. And one of the points they make, he says, well, you all remember seeing the movie WarGames? Well, it was really funky before the movie. That showed what it should look like. And today, it looks like the movie. It's the other way, so if you go there, you say, they copied we copied it? It's the other way around. They copied the movie.
That's great.
No.
I bet it cost the military more than $1 million.
I bet.
And Duncan Wilmore also then became a consultant, and I remember calling him up at 10 at night, and I'm going, Duncan, I'm writing this scene. What would happen if we thought, Russian missiles were about to land on America? How would you tell? What would you do? And he said, well, I guess the commander could call up various bases and get them on the line and tell them to just hold tight and see what happens. I said, okay, thanks, Duncan. So, it's like if you have good consultants, they do most of the work for you.
So I want to get back to something you said earlier about how, you cherry-pick the technology that you used or invented in order to serve the character and to serve the plot. It strikes me that many movies use technology for that reason, perhaps overuse it as a deus ex machina kind of thing, or as some sort of wish fulfillment. And as a result, you end up with this, I guess, very cartoonish kind of use of technology in movies. I would say that most movies aren't very well served by the way that they depict technology and computers in particular. I think you guys avoided that trap in WarGames and also in Sneakers, which I think is popular for the same reason. Why do you think that most movies get it so bad, and what did you guys do differently?
The question was asked in the green room before, and it's a very exhausting and exhaustive process to go and research these things. And to somehow juggle the information with the needs of making a peppy plot that actually works in 90 or 100, 110 minutes, it's just it's a time-consuming process. And in some ways, particularly in the last 15, 20, 25 years, the system works in studio that there are enormous stakes on these films coming to market very quickly, and it's just, as far as I can tell, they're difficult, and there are not that many filmmakers that have the patience to kind of go and do that kind of work.
And we were, they kept saying, where's the script? Where's the script? We're going, do you want it fast or do you want it good? But, you get fired.
I worked on a movie with Walter, Minority Report, and a lot of the fun in that movie is the technology.
Yeah.
But, it's also the incredible energy of the drive to solve this mystery of what's going on here. And if you don't have that at the center of a movie, then all that technology gets in the way.
There might be something else, too, which WarGames was made pre-digital technologies. If you were to see how those screens were filled with images during the making of WarGames, on every time you saw a missile display, there was actually a projector behind the screen, 50, 75, 100 feet back, all of them synchronized together. So they were projecting on the back so that our cameras would capture the images in the front. So every time you would do a film, you would have to roll everything back, put everything in sync. Remember, the AD would yell, lock and roll, and you'd start over again. It couldn't be more mechanical and less digital. Honestly, at a time of digital technologies, there's an enormous amount of bang for your buck that comes from just the visceral reaction to film. And sometimes that makes it all the more difficult to stay really disciplined on the storytelling aspects of it. I mean, when you have a Peter Jackson or something like that, you get everything, but those instances are few and far between. When you really look at WarGames, you'll see it's a pretty rudimentary movie from a technological point of view. We really had to deal with the character issues and the story issues for the movie to work.
So does this mean that it took you a particularly long time to make the movie, to write it, and to produce it?
In Hollywood terms, it was not a particularly long time. I mean, now with the 25 years of hindsight, it took about a good year to do the script. Am I right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
3 months to research it.
Including all the
9 months
research
to write it.
and everything.
For an original script, it's not out of whack.
In fact, I recently found an original copy.
Really?
Yeah, of what was the semi-final script, I think.
Yes. Titled The Genius.
Yeah.
We were never good at titles. But then there was the requisite political battles and budget battles and battles with directors that kind of seem to attend any movie in Hollywood. So it took about another year and a half before it actually went in front of cameras.
So moving beyond some of the technical issues, you talk about the importance of character
Yes.
interaction. Yet, as we mentioned earlier, the main characters were pretty new to movies. Was casting difficult? Was it intentional to try to look for kind of new faces? What issues did you think about and face there?
Well, on that movie, we weren't really involved in the casting. We had been sort of removed as writers by the first director, who then got fired in the second week of production.
Martin
and
Best.
John Badham came on to direct it, and he brought us back into the project. He called us up and said, I'm looking at a script here that's going to be about 3 hours long, and it looks like everyone's had a hand in it, including Willie the Gate Guard. Do you have a version of the script that you'd like me to read? And I said, yeah, we have a second draft that no one... We'd finished the second draft, which we were in the middle of when we were fired by the first director, because basically his agent told him, if you got to make it your movie, get rid of these putzes, and you'll make it your movie. So he got rid of the putzes, and so they had the world blowing up, and I mean he didn't get the script, and so Badham said, we'll send it over to me, and so I did, and that was the second draft. They'd never bothered to read it. We did finish the second draft, even though we'd been fired.
We had been fired.
It was amazing that Walter called me up. We were like so depressed, and he called me up and he said, that scene, that we're working on, we could, if we did this, we could work. And I go, oh, Walter, the baby's dead. You're like picking up its arm, and it was so pathetic. But he kind of said, yeah, but if we do this, we do this in the scene. He goes, oh yeah, that's a good idea. And he said, well, let's finish the script anyway, because we're still producers of record,
Yeah,
so.
and they can't stop you from writing.
Right, yeah.
They cannot read it.
And so we finished the second draft, and we sent it in, and they never read it. And Badham was the first person associated with the movie who read it, and he was reading the escape scene from the infirmary in NORAD, and that was in our second draft. And they had just some god-awful Smokey and the Bandit kind of scene where the FBI has escorted him, taking him somewhere, and it's in a Howard Johnson's, and the FBI agent has to take the boy in to take a leak. And so then a sheriff wanders into the bathroom, and he sees this man in a suit with the pants around the floor, and he says, "You fixin' to lope the boy's mule?" And so Badham, I called him up on Sunday to see how he was liking our second draft, and he was reading that scene, and he said, "This is pretty clever, this escape." And I said, "Good, I'm glad you liked it." And he goes, "But they've already built the set for that scene in the Howard Johnson's." And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, I guess we'll have to tear down the set anyway, whether we shoot there or not." And I go, "Yeah, there you go."
To answer the question, though, about casting, John Badham, who directed the movie, was a much more kind of straightforward and more commercial director than Marty Brest was. And I think his choices, although actually, as I think about it, Matthew was cast by Marty, probably the David Lightman we had imagined was a punkier kid. And I think it was not a bad thing that a more accessible kid that felt slightly more middle class became David Lightman. That's a good example of why it's good for writers to write and directors to direct, because there are different values that are brought to the process by different people.
So you may not have been involved in the casting, but the initial pitch to MGM, presumably that was something that you guys did.
The initial pitch of the movie?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. What kinds of issues did you find there? Did they focus on one aspect or another that surprised you?
Well, what was interesting is, we really were nobodies, and we hadn't written a script or made a movie or anything, and it was an example of the voraciousness of Hollywood's appetite. All we had with our pitch was this suggestion of this journey of this kid from one environment that doesn't understand it to become the successor to this dying super genius, and we said, and we need a lot of money to go research some cool stuff. And quite honestly, based on that, we had a lot of interest and were able to make a fairly substantial deal just because they thought, well, gee, for whatever reason, the producers involved at that time felt that maybe we were on the cusp of some kind of cultural change vis-a-vis technology. In fact, I think there had been a Time magazine recently that showed new technological things on the cover. We'd show it to them. You see, this is what's happening in the world.
Also, I remember we had gone into the producer's office, and we, of course, didn't meet with him. We met with his assistant. And she said, well, it sounds like a nice idea, but Leonard, next week is Thanksgiving, so why don't you come back in a couple of weeks, and because he doesn't want to do anything before Thanksgiving. So on the way out, I had been a script reader, and even and so you write 2.5 pages to describe the script and tell them why they don't have to read the script, and even if you submit a treatment, 20 pages,
they don't want to
the script reader writes 2.5 pages, because they're just too busy. So I had 2.5 pages that we had written on what the journey of this kid was and the dying scientist in the world of blah blah blah. So on the way out, I just slipped it onto the producer's desk, and we got a call the next morning saying, "Get your butts in here. He wants to talk to you."
Wow, that's a good tip for people. So I guess we're getting pretty close to the half-hour cutoff time. Oh, we have a few more minutes. So I will ask one final question, but to get everything in, it's going to be a 7-part question. Part 1. So this is about thinking a bit further how this movie's kind of the impact it's had over the years. And there are a couple different aspects, I guess, that are interesting. One is to think about the movie in its own terms. It's this Cold War era movie, has this view of technology that was really just a warning. It's just the start of kind of the computer revolution. Fears about how that might be used or misused. 25 years later, what do you think of kind of the predictions that you made or the issues you made? Do you think that the movie is alarmist, too conservative, kind of just right in what it's saying?
Well, it has one of the great lines that has proven to be very, very prophetic, and the last line, the only winning move is not to play, about mutually assured destruction and about what was going to happen with the end of the Cold War. That, in fact, it never reached the thermonuclear war, and it was the recognition on both sides, ultimately, that the only winning move was not to play. And so, I think that was one of the key nubs that actually, I don't want to say that it contributed to the end of the Cold War. That would be an enormous overstatement. But it anticipated, in many ways, the kind of tension and its resolution in a very benign way.
Apparently, Reagan quoted that line. I hadn't heard that before. Scott Brown said that Reagan used it in a speech.
Yeah, I got something from some guys writing a paper about it and said it to Scott Brown. I was asked a similar question recently in terms of, was it alarmist? Is it a cautionary tale? And this came very clear to me just during our tour of Google when we were shown kind of the first server, which is a very extraordinary thing to see over here. And I actually think that one of the things that fueled Larry and me when we got into this, the thermonuclear war was interesting and all that, but there was a kind of a spirit of young people who had this really different attitude about technology, which was, oh, I'll fix that. Oh, there's information. I'll go get that. There was this kind of breaking down of the kind of separation, the kind of the wall of the expert, and a kind of a democratization about access to information that was I think very much at the heart of what kind of turned us on about David Lightman as a character. Mm-hmm. And, I think it's the part of the movie that I think that's probably most relevant right now. That was really, I think, the fuel in the engine from our point of view.
Mm-hmm. So if you were to write the movie today as opposed to 25 years ago, would you keep that part of the theme? You think it's still appropriate today, or would you concentrate on some different kinds of issues?
That's a good...
Boy, if you look around this room, it would be, it'd be any one of you would have been David Lightman.
Yeah. You see, I think David Lightman would be here.
Yeah.
And I think Joshua would get out and find him.
All right.
And it would turn into Colossus the Forbin Project.
How many of you saw... we were talking about this. How many of you have seen Colossus, the Forbin Project? Yes. All right, so the rest of you, that's another computer movie you have to see. Rent it.
It doesn't have as happy an ending, does it?
No. Well, it depends on your point of view. You can't give away the ending, though.
Oh, okay. It has a maybe happy ending. So you mentioned that, and I guess this will be the last question, a very important one, I think. You mentioned Reagan used this line, from the movie. It was, about the Cold War. Did people in the Soviet Union see this movie, and what did they think of it?
I'm sorry, who?
People in the Soviet Union.
Yeah, I don't remember hearing any feedback from over behind the Iron Curtain.
Well, the only one that I didn't see it in the Soviet Union, but Hungary. I have a family in Budapest. I'm Hungarian, and they're in the computer science business. My cousin, who was in the computer science, was the head of the networking lab at the Academy of Sciences, saw it about maybe 2 years after it came out in the West. Mm-hmm. And he heard I was involved, and he was incredibly enthusiastic. And again, this was 1985. The Berlin Wall hadn't fallen. Communism was beginning to crumble at the edges. And he said, this is our future.
This is what?
This is our future. We can see the world coming apart in this movie. And he's a very serious Hungarian scientist, deep voice, and this is our. He wasn't quite Edward Teller; he didn't have quite that voice, but he had that kind of gravitas, and he said, "This is what will become of us here."
Well, great. Well, Mr. Parks, Mr. Lasker, Mr. Schwartz, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Craig. And thank you all for coming today.
Yeah.
Enjoy the movie.
Yeah.
Thank you. The most important part of tonight's event is that you get to win this computer that was actually not in WarGames at all. But it is an original TRS-80 Model 1, known affectionately to those who use it as the Trash 80, from the same era. And there is a person in this audience who it's going to go home with. And I'm going to...
Does it work?
Does it work? Let's check. The plug is right here. But if you plug it into a wall, I've been told it will in fact work. Where are the disk drives? Did someone ask where the disk drives were? This is a Model 1 TRS-80. There's a cassette player that you plug into the back of it somewhere. And you load Decathlon from the cassette player, and you hit the J and the K key a lot of times like this, and then you go on from there. So I think this is still locked. But there's a key. I don't know if it comes with software. You might have to program it yourself. So I can shake it. The box is officially shucken. I'm opening it up. I'm closing my eyes. Congratulations! It actually has no name on it, but it does have a number. 156418. Ta-da! Let me confirm the ticket. Oh my, they match. Congratulations. Yeah, just after the movie? Or? No, just take it with you right now. No, you can leave it here. Congratulations.